first question I sort of had on that, Eric, was there are a lot of things he said in his inaugural address that were, in a sense, addressed to foreign countries and foreign nations. And how do you think that played? And do you think he'll be able to live up to some of what he kind of laid out as far as a picture of the United States re-engaging with the world here? What are the challenges to doing that?
Well, I think there's several challenges, Tom. So first of all, I thought the president's inaugural address was, uh, very good. And he's not a natural orator, but I think he did a really good job. And for the time we're in and the moment we're in, I thought it was very much sort of on point and I think was very, very well received. And you could see that, in the polling data. He starts out now in his first week as president with a higher approval rating than Donald Trump ever had in the entire 4 years of his presidency. So that's all, to the good. Having said that, it's easy to take some easy symbolic actions like saying that we're going back into the Paris Climate Accord. I mean, the Paris Climate Accord is a worthy aspirational document. It actually doesn't really commit nations to do all that much. There's not really an enforcement mechanism, so it both will going back in will not either accomplish as much as President Biden would like us to believe, nor will it do as much damage to the economy as someone like Senator Ted Cruz thinks it will. So it's purely symbolic, and it's fine for what it is. But it's one thing for President Biden to say America's back, as he said in a pre-inauguration interview with Lester Holt of NBC News. Um, and certainly it's the case that I think most governments are breathing a sigh of relief. Certainly our European allies, for the most part, with some exceptions that we can talk about, but for the most part, they're breathing a sigh of relief that they don't have to deal with a president who is fundamentally ignorant, frequently unhinged, and constantly threatening to withdraw the United States from NATO, uh, to something that approaches a more normal American president from their experience. But it's one thing to say the United States is back and that it's going to be, as he put it, at the head table, playing a leading role in the world. It's another thing to actually do that. And it's going to take a lot of hard work. It's going to take a lot of repair work. Um, and we can talk about some of the specifics. I mean, there's going to have to be some institutional repair work to repair the damaged institutions of American leadership at home in terms of the Defense Department, the State Department, the National Security Council, and the decision making processes of government. It's going to take some diplomatic work, both in the sort of day to day diplomacy carried out by ambassadors and envoys to various countries or regions, but also work by the president, Vice President Harris, Secretary Blinken, who's just been confirmed, um, and others at NATO ministerials, at ASEAN ministerials, at APEC ministerials. There's going to be a lot of work required.
Are there small steps that we can take? It feels hard to really go back to everyone and go like, yeah, you can trust us again. We're a very
Right.
predictable actor, long term, because even if we know Biden's going to be there for 4 years, or we believe that Biden's going to be there for 4 years, how do we know something else is going to happen in 4 years from now, where you guys run away again or leave these institutions again? Like, what can he do? Where should he focus?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, and I hear constantly from some of my former counterparts in other governments that your president elect or President Biden now says you're back and you're going to be a leader, but for 12 years we've had administrations that didn't seem very interested in leading. So how do we know that there's really a corner that's been turned here? Look, there's no substitute for first of all, doing what American presidents in the post World War II era have traditionally done, which is consolidating our alliances. And that's why I said there's going to have to be a lot of work at ministerial summits where the Secretary of State, the Vice President, the President are present, are um, listening to our allies, making it clear we value our alliances, that we don't see them as purely just transactions, but we see them as alliances that are held together by common values and common beliefs. and common purposes. So I think, first attention to our alliances, which has been a tradition for presidents during the Cold War and the post-Cold War, is well worth President Biden's time. Repairing the trade order, which has been disrupted by President Trump's trade wars, which turn out not to be, you know, um, uh, easy to win, as he put it. Turns out that they're actually quite complicated. Uh, that's going to, require some effort, and in particular, is going to be require some effort because it was not just Donald Trump who, tore up the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade agreement that was negotiated by President Obama. If you recall, in 2016 election, both Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton opposed the TPP. So again, it'd be nice to just lay this all at Donald Trump's doorstep, but it's more than just Trump, and so I think that's going to be a big challenge for the Biden administration. Now, again, in that interview I mentioned that President Biden gave to Lester Holt, he said that this was not going to be a third administration, a third Obama administration. It was going to be the Biden administration. Now, again, he made that statement, and I think it was an important recognition, as President Biden himself said, that things have changed. A lot of our alliances have been damaged, as we've just been discussing. But um, the fact is, of course, he's populating his administration with people, all of whom are essentially veterans of the Obama administration. So allies and other partners around the world, as well as adversaries, are going to be looking at the administration to see, is this in fact just going to be another Obama term, in which case it's going to be tougher to make the case for U.S. leadership, or is it going to be something, different?
What would you suggest is the right approach to some of the more adversarial relationships?
I'm a little disappointed that one of the first things that the administration did right out of the gate was to extend the New START treaty by 5 years. And I had written over a year ago with my former government colleague Frank Miller an op-ed in Politico, which we argued that, in fact, what we ought to be pursuing with Russia with regard to New START, because there is an argument for extension, but the um, argument that Frank and I made was that we should agree to extend the treaty by 1 year, contingent upon Russia negotiating about things that have been left out of the treaty that are not covered, nuclear weapons not covered by the treaty, which includes the very large number of so-called theater or tactical nuclear weapons, which really is a misnomer. I mean, it's got to do with arms control arcana that we call them tactical. I mean, these are nuclear weapons. If one of them blew up in Estonia, the Estonians would not think it was tactical. They would think it was very, very strategic. So,
It's certainly a
um,
very bad tactic at the very least.
yeah. So those weapons are not covered by the treaty. In addition, there are these new exotic weapons, like the nuclear-powered cruise missile and other new weapons that President Putin announced a year or two ago in his press conference that aren't covered, that need to be covered. And there is the question of China, which is engaging in a very thoroughgoing, both quantitative and qualitative nuclear buildup of its own, that needs to be included at some point, not perhaps right away, but at some point in these arms control discussions. And the administration chose to just renew for 5 years without trying to get anything from the Russians. Now, there is an argument. I understand why. I mean, the treaty needed to be renewed by February 5th. There's not a lot of time. They had a short transition because of all the falderall with President Trump contesting the election. I get all that, but I still don't understand why you wouldn't at least make an effort to see if you could get something short of 5 years with the Russians. I mean, they have to, after all, face the February 5th deadline too. They seem to very much want to keep the U.S. in the treaty. Um, and why we wouldn't have at least tried to get something, from that, I don't know. I'm told that there was no real interagency process. I'm told that both the State Department and the Defense Department preferred a shorter rollover uh, sort of along the lines that I described a minute or two ago. Um, and I suppose the defense for the administration is that nobody's been confirmed, nobody's in place, hard to have a process. But I still think it sends a not great signal to the Russians about how anxious the administration is for arms control agreements, and that will be used, against us in subsequent negotiations and stuff, subsequent efforts to negotiate.
What is your feeling about the rise of authoritarianism in certain countries in certain parts of the world, and indeed, maybe our own flirtation with such things? What kind of challenge does that pose? Both from the short and long term to America's national interest.
It's a very big challenge, and it's one that is discomforting to Americans, and it's not something we're used to. And it requires, I think, a kind of adjustment of our kind of attitudes and our appreciation of how the world is working today. So since the end of the Second World War, we all grew up in a Cold War era in which the major challenge internationally to democracy was from the left, essentially from totalitarian parties of the left, communist parties, operating frequently for most of the Cold War, if not all of it, at the direction of Moscow and in the interest not even of their own countries, but or their own parties, but of the state interest of the Soviet Union. And that was the biggest challenge and the biggest threat that we faced. And one of the things that helped the West succeed in that effort was liberal anti-communism. It was people on the center left saying communist parties are beyond the pale and can't really be considered as partners in government in the West because they owe their allegiance not to their own nation but to Moscow. Um, Today, with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the disappearance of communism as a coherent ideology, and the I would add in China the migration of China away from communism towards something that looks like state capitalism, still a big challenge, but not quite the same kind of challenge we faced with the Soviet Union in the Cold War. The major threat globally to democracy is from the extreme right. And that's something that certainly Vladimir Putin recognizes. He, just as the Soviet Union supported with subventions and other kinds of means the communist parties during the Cold War, President Putin and his own disinformation apparatus is offering enormous amounts of support, both financial and otherwise, to parties of the far right. And they've had some success. But this is a huge challenge, and it's a huge challenge for conservatives because we need to be calling out the authoritarian right, the racist, white supremacist, neo-Nazi, um, uh, and crazy, frankly, right, QAnon and other elements, because it's a major threat now, not only globally to democracy, but here at home.